Tonight, we will be reading some scary stories as I play REANIMAL. As usual, the stories will be linked in the description along with the music used, videos used, timestamps, playlist, and my TikTok. If you like videos like this, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. We live underground now, because the king let his last daughter live. There was a law in the bones of the land. I learned it before I learned how to polish silver in the king's halls. No daughter of the crown shall ever carry life, or the sky will split and pour its black teeth upon the fields. The old priest said the curse was older than the soil itself. They whispered that the first queen once birthed a god, and that the god opened its eyes and became a beast. So the daughters died. I helped dig 2 of the graves when I was younger. Small ones. Too small to be called graves at all. Some daughters were strangled in their cradles before the midwives finished washing them. Some were taken to the sea with stones sewn into their gowns. Most were buried before their names were ever written. The king prayed through it all, though his hands were always bloody afterward. But the last one, the final daughter, they let her live. No one ever told us why. Perhaps the king's heart cracked at last. Perhaps he forgot what grief costs. Or perhaps he had simply grown tired of digging graves behind the chapel. I saw her grow, silent child, watchful. She walked the palace halls like someone listening to things the rest of us could not hear. There was something strange in the way she stood in the moonlight, too still, like a statue remembering how to breathe. The servants whispered constantly. They said she hummed to the walls at night. I heard it once while carrying coal to the kitchens, a thin little tune drifting through the stone like it had no mouth. Some swore she left no footprints in the dust. Others said she spent hours in the locked library reading the same book. Then one winter, she began to swell. No man had touched her. We all knew it, yet her belly grew day by day, and the kingdom began to rot with it. The cattle stopped giving milk. Bread came out of ovens full of black feathers. Children were born with their mouths sealed shut, like wax dolls. Even the scarecrows in the fields started whispering when the wind passed through them. The king summoned her to the throne room. I was there that day, standing behind the pillars with the other servants, trying not to breathe too loudly. She walked in barefoot. Her hair hung over her face like a veil she had grown herself. And she smiled, not the way children smile. "Let me fix it," she said. Then she went into the chapel and locked the doors behind her. 9 days passed. No one entered. No one dared. The bells did not ring, and the priest refused to speak the prayers aloud. We simply waited. On the 9th day, the doors opened. She came out carrying a bundle. I remember how quiet the room became when we saw the child. It wasn't crying, just breathing, faint and thin, wrapped in frostbitten parchment. The cord was still around its neck. Looped 3 times like a crown. She walked straight to the throne. No one stopped her. Not the guards. Not the priests. Not even the king. She bent down, kissed the child's head gently, and drove a silver knife into its chest. The baby did not scream, but the sky did. The sound was so loud the windows cracked. Blood began seeping from the castle bricks, as if the walls themselves had veins. Ravens outside the tower windows turned in the air and flew backward. I swear the statues in the hall lowered their heads and covered their eyes. The king whispered, "It is done." But it wasn't. The princess suddenly doubled over. Her hands clutched her stomach like something inside had answered the knife. "I hear it," she said. Then she collapsed. At first I thought it was grief or pain, but then we all heard it. A knocking, soft Inside her, another. Her knees struck the marble floor as the land itself seemed to shudder. Later we heard what happened beyond the palace walls. Rivers turning to mirrors, people drowning in puddles while staring at their reflections, fields splitting open to grow teeth instead of grain. She stared at her stomach as something pushed outward from beneath the skin. But the second child never came. It stayed inside her, and it was awake. It curled somewhere behind her heart and began to grow. It had no mouth, yet it spoke. The princess said it sang nursery rhymes against her ribs like someone scratching on a coffin lid. Mother, mother, eat the sun. Let me out when all is done. After that she changed. Her skin thinned like paper. Her spine bent backward until she could walk sideways through palace halls. Sometimes I saw her shadow move before she did, stretching along the walls as if it were tasting the stone. The kingdom begged for an end. People prayed for fire, for salt, even for plague if it meant forgetting. The king could not bear it. One night, he forced his own crown down his throat. It took 3 days for him to die. When they carried the body out, gold was leaking from his eyes, but she remained, still wandering, still carrying something that had never learned death, and the sun has not returned since. It hangs somewhere behind clouds, watching but never rising. We live underground now, most of us who survived. I keep the old chapel keys, even though the chapel is long gone. At night, we sing lullabies in the dark to keep the crying away, because sometimes in the tunnels you hear a baby crying, but there is never a baby. And if you hear it, do not answer, do not search, do not speak, because it is still trying to be born again, and it remembers us. I found a list of rules in my new apartment. I should have taken them seriously. When I moved into my apartment, the leasing agency told me the previous tenant had left in a hurry. That didn't seem unusual. I live in Geneva. People move all the time, sometimes fast. The place was clean, empty, ready to go. A small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor. Nothing special, except for one thing. There was a single sheet of paper on the living room table. Not an official document, not a note addressed to anyone, just a printed page. At the top in bold, rules to follow, apartment 3B. I honestly thought it was a joke. I sat down and read it. Do not open the door if someone knocks after 10 p.m. If you hear your name in the hallway, do not go out. Never leave your bedroom door open at night. If you wake up and the door is open, do not look into the hallway. Close it immediately. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not use the bathroom mirror. If a light turns on by itself, do not turn it off. Do not move the chair in the living room. If the chair has been moved, leave the apartment immediately for the night. Never sleep with your phone uncharged. If you hear someone breathing near you while you are alone, pretend to be asleep. I remember smiling. It felt like something the previous tenant left behind as a joke, or maybe to mess with whoever moved in next. I left the paper on the table and started unpacking. The first week was completely normal. I barely even thought about it. Then one night, around 11 p.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 times. Not aggressive, just deliberate. I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up to open it. Then I remember the paper. Do not open the door if someone knocks after 10 p.m. I stopped right in front of the door, looked through the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty. I waited. Nothing. I went back to the couch. The next day, the building manager asked me, "Were you home last night?" I said yes. She frowned slightly. "That's strange. Someone said they heard you open your door." I didn't think too much about it. A few days later, around midnight, I was in bed, half asleep, and I heard something in the hallway. Not footsteps, not movement, just a voice. Low, calm, saying my name. Once, Clearly, I froze. My heart started racing immediately. I thought about the list. If you hear your name in the hallway, do not go out. I didn't move. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, silence. That's when it stopped being funny. Days went by, and without really deciding to, I started following the rules. Not consciously, just automatically. Then one night, I made a mistake. I came home exhausted, collapsed into bed, and forgot to close my bedroom door. I woke up in the middle of the night. No idea why. I was lying on my back, staring straight ahead, and I saw it immediately. The door, wide open, facing the hallway, dark. I remembered the rule. If you wake up and the door is open, do not look into the hallway. But I already had. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I realized something was wrong. The hallway looked darker than usual, like the light wasn't reaching all the way to the end. And at the far end, there was something, not a clear shape, not a person, just something darker than the darkness around it, standing there, not moving. I don't know how long I looked. A second, maybe more. Then I slammed the door shut. I stayed sitting in my bed for several minutes, not moving, not breathing properly. The next morning, the paper was still on the table, but something had changed. There was a new line. I am 100% sure it wasn't there before. 11. If you look into the hallway when the door is open, it will know you can see it. I live alone. I never told anyone about that list. And yet, it changed. Since then, I follow every rule. Exactly. But last night, when I got home, the chair in the living room was not in its place. I'm still standing in the doorway as I write this. I haven't moved, because for the first time, I don't know if I still have time to leave. The slip and slide in the woods. My name is Frank, and I quit, effective immediately. I am no longer willing to pretend that what happens in this place is normal, because it is not. This place is sick. If there is a God, then he turns a blind eye to what happens here. Instead of writing a typical resignation letter, I am simply going to document what happened yesterday. I am certain that anyone who reads this will either understand why I am leaving or think I am insane. I will sign this statement. I will swear to it under oath if anyone asks. What follows is true, recalled to the best of my ability. For those who do not know me, I am a search and rescue officer with the National Park Service. Up until about a week ago, I loved my job. The wilderness brings with it a lot of strange happenings, and I have heard more than my fair share of strange stories. The people of Glen Haven are deeply superstitious. They always have been. But even with the rumors and campfire legends, I always found the job extremely rewarding. Out here you learn to ground yourself in reality. People get lost and they panic. The woods are bigger than most people realize, and fear can make the imagination run wild. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that the boogeyman is not real. There are no werewolves roaming the forests. There is no witch trapped in some forgotten well, making clothing out of skin. And a random staircase in the woods is just that, a staircase. That's what I used to believe. A few weeks ago, my colleague and friend Josh disappeared from the job, just stopped showing up. Josh had been my partner for years. We worked every kind of call together. Lost hikers, injured climbers, the occasional recovery that none of us like to talk about afterward. He was good at the job, calm under pressure, sharp instincts, the kind of guy who could pick up on small details that others might miss. I knew he had been thinking about leaving. We had sat down together a few times and worked on his resume. He talked about moving somewhere quieter, somewhere without the constant search calls and the long nights. I figured eventually he would put in his notice like anyone else. But that is not what happened. Josh did not resign. He did not transfer. He did not say goodbye. One day he was here, and the next day he was simply gone. The last time I saw him was the morning of his final shift. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said he had not been sleeping well. I left early that day. Now I wish I hadn't. Something about the woods had been bothering him for a while. I assumed he meant the stories the locals like to tell. The usual nonsense. I tried calling him that evening after he failed to show up for a shift. It went straight to voicemail. I sent a message asking if everything was all right. No response. A day passed. Then another. Eventually I stopped calling. Maybe I reminded him too much of the job. Maybe he just wanted to leave this place behind completely. I guess it does not really matter now. Since Josh left, no one has replaced him. It has just been me working the long shifts. Me and Gus. Gus has been here longer than I have. He was already part of the team when I started years ago. He is old now. His muzzle has gone gray, and he moves a little slower when he first gets up. But when it comes to finding a scent, there is nothing slow about him. Gus is the best tracker I have ever seen. We have had kids go missing out here before. Sometimes the only thing left behind is a backpack or a jacket. You let Gus smell it, and he will put his nose to the ground like someone flipped a switch. Then he just goes, straight through brush, across streams, up hills, like he has a map running in his head. More than once it's felt like watching a GPS find its route. Sometimes I know someone's going to be fine by how quick he moves. Gus has saved a lot of people. More than me. Yesterday evening started like any other. I was sitting in the ranger station going through paperwork when there was a knock at the door. I got up and opened it. A woman came stumbling inside. It was around 6 in the evening. She looked like she had run the whole way there. Her breath came in sharp. Uneven bursts and tears were streaming down her face. She told me her son was missing. They had been out walking one of the upper trails together. 1 minute he had been right beside her. The next minute he was gone. Just like that. Poof. I did my best to calm her down. Panic spreads fast in situations like that. And if you let it take over, you lose precious time. I sat her down at the small desk near the front window and told her we would do everything we could to find him. Then I reached for the radio and tried to contact command. All I got back was static. That part was not unusual. The equipment around here is older than it should be, definitely breaking multiple codes. Please somebody make note of that, for whatever poor fools take my job. I have been complaining about it for years. The radios crackle, the batteries die quick, and half the time you are lucky if anyone hears you at all. I tried again. More static. No phone signal either. While I spoke with the mother, Gus stood quietly near front window. His ears were pointed toward the tree line, staring out into the woods as the sun slipped lower behind the hills. The light was fading fast, and the forest was already starting to sink into shadow. I asked her the usual questions while she tried to steady herself enough to answer. She didn't talk much. Her son was 6 years old. She had last seen him about 2 hours earlier. That might sound like a long time, but the place she described was near the highest point of our trail systems. We have 6 trail runs, and the topography changes greatly. The hike down from there takes a while even for us. I figured she must have searched as much as she could on her own before panic finally pushed her to run for help. Gus did not react to her the way he usually does. Normally, he walks right up to people, gives them a gentle nudge, or sits beside them like he understands they are scared. Even a simple wagging tail can calm someone down when they are in a situation like that. But tonight, for whatever reason, he was not in the mood. He kept staring into the woods. The mother reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a glove, blue and knitted. I felt like I recognized it. Maybe they sold it at the local Walmart or something. She told me it belonged to her son. I took the glove and knelt down beside Gus, holding it out for him to smell. His nose twitched as he caught the scent. He began to move towards the woods. So I knew we had a shot at getting the kid. I told the mother she should stay at the station while I went to search. That is the normal procedure. Missing person cases can get chaotic, and having family members wander in the trails usually makes things worse. But she begged me to let her come. She said she could not just sit there and wait. And looking at her, hearing the desperation in her voice, I realized I did not have it in me to tell her no. So I grabbed my flashlight, clipped the radio to my belt, and stepped out into the darkening woods with Gus leading the way. The mother calmed down a little once we started walking. That happens sometimes. Movement gives people something to focus on. I kept the conversation to a minimum. I have never been good at small talk anyway, and in situations like that it usually does more harm than good. People either want silence or answers. The trail was already getting dark beneath the trees. The sun had dipped low enough that the forest swallowed most of the remaining light. My flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the brush ahead of us, while Gus trotted a few yards in front, nose low to the ground. We had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed a beam of light flickering through the trees ahead of us. Another flashlight. At first it was just a faint glow between the trunks, moving slowly along the trail toward us. I stopped. The mother stayed close to me. I turned toward her. "Does your son have a flashlight with him?" She shook her head immediately. No. We kept walking toward the light. A minute later the beam rounded the bend in the trail, and its owner came into view. It was one of the regular hikers. I had seen her on the trails dozens of times over the years. Her name was Amanda, I think. The type you see out here all the time. Expensive Patagonia jacket. Fresh pair of Hoka Trail runners. One of those slim hiking backpacks that probably cost more than the radio sitting on my belt. Before I could even say hello, Gus bolted ahead of us. For a moment he looked 10 years younger. His tail wagged wildly as he bounded up to her, jumping and circling like an overexcited puppy. Amanda laughed and crouched down to greet him. "Well, hey there, Gus," she said, scratching behind his ears. I stepped closer and lifted my flashlight slightly so she could see my face. "Evening, Amanda." She looked up at me, still smiling. "Evening, Frank." I asked her if she had seen anyone else out on the trails that evening. "Anyone at all?" She shook her head. "No, just you now. Is everything all right?" I explained that a young boy had wandered off the trail, and we were trying to track him down before it got any darker. As I spoke, I glanced back toward the mother, half expecting her to add something. Maybe describe her son, maybe call his name, but she said nothing. She stood a few steps behind me with her head lowered, staring at the ground. Grief can hit people in strange ways. Some cry, some panic, some shut down completely. She was shutting down. "Amanda," and I spoke for another moment or two. She asked if there was anything she could do to help. Normally I would have told her to head back to the trailhead and stay clear of the search area. But with the radio acting up and no service out here, I needed someone who could reach the outside world. I told her that once she drove far enough from the park, she should call 911, explain that we had a missing child, and tell them which trail we are on. She nodded immediately. I thanked her and wished her a safe walk back. She started down the trail toward the valley. Gus watched her go for a moment, tail still wagging. Then he slowly walked back to my side. For some reason I could not quite explain, I found myself watching Amanda's flashlight a little longer than I needed to as it disappeared between the trees. Something about the encounter didn't feel right. At the time I told myself it was just the situation. Missing kids have a way of putting everyone on edge. We continued upward along the trail. As we climbed, the temperature dropped quickly and the air began to feel thinner. The forest grew quieter the higher we went. Even the wind seemed to disappear up there. The mother had not spoken in a long time. After a while I turned and asked if she needed water or wanted to stop and rest for a minute. She stood with her arms pulled tightly against her chest, as if trying to keep warm. Her long blonde hair hung forward and covered most of her face. When I asked the question, she simply shook her head. She never looked up. Ahead of us, Gus barked once, sharp and alert. He had wandered farther up the trail than usual. That normally meant the scent was strong, and he was confident about where he was going. We kept moving. Near the top of the trail, we reached a sharp bend and turned left. The trail narrowed there before fading out completely. Beyond that point, there was no official path. Just rough ground, loose rock, and low brush. Gus did not hesitate. He pushed straight into the trees. I turned back toward the mother and told her she should wait on the trail. It was safer there and easier for the search teams to find her later. She did not answer. She did not refuse either. She simply followed. Up close, I could see how pale she looked in the beam of my flashlight. Her skin almost seemed gray in the cold light. She looked freezing, but she never complained. After a few minutes of walking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the glove the woman had given me. Gus had already taken the scent and moved ahead, but I found myself turning the glove over my hand as we walked. I could tell something wasn't right. It felt strange. I rubbed the fabric between my fingers as I walked, trying to place a feeling. It felt bigger than I expected. I told myself it was nothing at the time, but it's clear now that the glove was adult size. It would have fit me, so it certainly wouldn't work for a 6-year-old. Gus barked from somewhere ahead on the trail, sharp and excited. I picked up the pace to follow him, letting the thought slip from my mind, and we pushed deeper into the woods until the darkness around us became nearly total. My flashlight was the only thing cutting through it. Then I heard it. At first it was faint, just a soft trickling sound somewhere ahead of us. Water maybe, a small stream running down the mountain. But as I followed Gus, the sound grew louder. Soon it was unmistakable. Running water. A moment later the trees opened up, and the source revealed itself in the beam of my light. I stopped dead in my tracks, because sitting at the top of that mountain was a slip and slide. A fucking slip and slide. Not some cheap plastic sheet either. This thing was huge. It had a large inflatable entrance at the top. A bright archway in yellow and red like something from a carnival. You'd half expect to see clowns or a Ferris wheel to be nearby. Water ran steadily down the plastic surface, glistening under the flashlight beam as it flowed downhill. It looked incredibly out of place. The water kept running, as if it was hooked up to some secret utility line. I felt sick the moment I saw it. If a 6-year-old boy had wandered up here and found that thing, there was no chance in hell he had ignored it. I turned to say something to the mother. She was gone. 1 second she had been behind me, like right behind me. On a few occasions she was so close I could feel her breath. The next there was nothing but darkness between the trees. I spun around and called out for her. No answer. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The forest swallowed my voice. Gus stood a few feet away, staring toward the slide. Slowly I walked toward the inflatable archway. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. The ground beneath my feet sloped sharply downward, and I realized just how steep the hillside really was. The slide began flat enough near the entrance, but within a few feet it dropped away into a steep slope, at least 45 degrees. Gus suddenly stopped behind me. Completely stopped. I turned and called for him to come along, but he would not move. He planted his feet in the dirt and refused to step any closer. It reminded me of a video game character hitting the invisible boundary of the map. Come on, Gus. He did not budge. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. Gus had followed me into every kind of terrain imaginable over the years. He was not the type to hesitate. But something about that slide made him refuse, and as it turns out, his instincts were on point. As I stepped closer to the archway, I began to feel strange, lightheaded, almost like I had been drinking. My thoughts felt slow and distant, like they were drifting away from me, and then a thought appeared in my head. I should try the slide. It felt completely reasonable. You know, like when you try to explain a dream, and it sounds insane, but it felt normal at the time. I took off my coat and dropped it on the ground. Then I stepped out of my boots. I even caught myself wondering what the best way to go down would be. Head first on my stomach or sliding down on my back. The idea seemed fun, exciting. Gus began barking wildly behind me. His bark was sharp and frantic now. Nothing like the friendly noise he made earlier with Amanda. I stepped forward toward the plastic surface, ready to launch myself down. Then something slammed into my leg. A burst of sharp pain shot to my ankle, and I looked down to see Gus clamped onto it with his teeth. His jaws were locked tight around my leg. I panicked. Without thinking, I swung my arm and hit him across the head. He let go. The force of the movement threw me off balance, and I stumbled sideways. My foot slipped in the wet grass beside the slide. Then suddenly I was falling. I rolled down the hillside beside the plastic surface, picking up speed immediately. The slope was even steeper than it looked from the top. Dirt and rocks tore at my clothes as gravity dragged me downward. In seconds, I realized just how much danger I was in. Luckily, and also unluckily, I slammed into a tree at what felt like 60 miles an hour. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs, and I felt something break in my ribs, or maybe my arm. Pain exploded through my body, and I collapsed at the base of the trunk. When I finally managed to lift my head and look forward, my stomach dropped. About 3 feet past that tree, the ground simply ended. A sheer cliff, at least 100 feet straight down to boulders and rocks. If that tree had not been there, I would not be writing this. I looked down into the darkness below the cliff and saw something among the rocks. At first, it was just a shape. Something hunched over and curled in on itself between a cluster of boulders. My heart jumped. Hey kid, are you all right? The words felt stupid the moment they left my mouth. A fall like that would have killed almost anyone, let alone a 6-year-old. Still, you say things like that automatically in this job. You say them because sometimes you get lucky, but not this time. No one answered. I forced myself to my feet and looked for a way down. The cliff was steep, but not completely vertical. There was a narrow path of broken stone and dirt that curved along the face of the drop. If I was careful, I might be able to reach the rocks below. Maybe the kid had survived. Maybe he was unconscious. Maybe there was still something I could do. I had to try. So I started down. Every step hurt. My ribs screamed every time I tried to breathe too deeply. I could feel blood running down my side and soaking into my shirt. More than once my vision blurred, and I had to stop and steady myself against the rock. But I kept moving. It took a long time to reach the bottom. By the time I finally stepped onto the loose stones surrounding the cluster of boulders, my legs were shaking and my lungs felt like they were filled with fire. Only then did I realize Gus was gone. I had not seen him since I fell. I told myself he must have stayed at the top of the slope. Dogs are smart about cliffs. Smarter than people sometimes. I hoped he was all right. I hoped he forgave me for striking him. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I slowly approached the body. Over the years, I have seen things that would turn most people's stomachs. Recoveries that lasted days in the heat. Bodies that had been in the wilderness long enough for the forest to start reclaiming them. But nothing prepared me for what I saw lying between those rocks. It wasn't a child. It was Josh. For a moment, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The image in front of me just did not make sense. Josh lay twisted against the stones, his body broken and half collapsing on itself. He looked impossibly thin, gaunt, like the flesh had shrunk tight against his bones. His skin was gray beneath the dried blood. His jaw hung wide open at an unnatural angle, clearly shattered in the fall. The smell hit me a second later. Rot and old blood and the sour stink of something that had been lying out in the wild for too long. It was clear that animals had been feeding on him. One of his legs was gone entirely. torn and taken. His arms were stretched out in front of him, rigid and twisted, as if he had hit the rocks head first with his hands reaching out to catch himself. Weeks. That was my first thought. He had been here for weeks. The force had been slowly taking him apart piece by piece, while the rest of us wondered why he stopped showing up for work. I sank to my knees beside him, and that was when I saw it. One glove, still clinging to his hand. One. My stomach turned cold. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the glove the woman had given me earlier. For a moment, I just stared at the two of them. Then I held mine beside the one on Josh's hand. They matched perfectly. Same color, same stitching, same worn thread at the wrist. My hands began to shake. I looked back up toward the cliff above me, toward the slide, and for just a second, in the faint glow of my flashlight reflecting off the wet plastic above, I saw a figure standing there. Tall, pale, a woman. She was looking down at me. Her face was hidden in the darkness. The mother. The moment my light shifted toward her, she stepped backward and disappeared into the night. I shouted after her. Words I won't write down. The forest swallowed my voice. Then I looked back down at Josh, and the reality of what had happened finally hit me. Josh had not quit. He had been taken out here, tricked the same way I had been, led to the slide. I had never been more grateful for Gus. I sat there beside what was left of my friend and started to cry. Josh did not deserve to die like that. Over the next few agonizing hours, I managed to drag myself back down the mountain and make it to the ranger station. Every step felt like I was being stabbed in the ribs. By the time I reached the door, I was barely conscious. There were police waiting for me. Amanda had done exactly what I asked. She must have found a signal and called it in, because the lot was full of patrol cars when I stumbled out of the woods. They sat me down and started first aid right there on the floor of the station. Someone wrapped my side. Someone else shined a light in my eyes. All the while they kept asking questions. What happened? Where the body was? What I had seen? I told them everything. I told them about the boy. I told them about the trail. I told them about the slip and slide sitting at the top of the mountain like some kind of bullshit from a cartoon. Some of them glanced at each other. I know they think I'm mad, but they won't when they go out there. I told them about the woman who led me out there, the one who gave me the glove, the one who stood at the top of that slide and watched me fall. They had me repeat the story again and again that night. Every detail, every step. Some of the officers knew Josh personally. So when I told them what I found at the bottom of the cliff, the room went quiet. While relaying the story, a thought came to mind. We have cameras. The ranger station has security cameras covering every entrance and the parking lot. We could review them to get an image of the women. I remember feeling angry while I was waiting for this to work. Angry and hopeful at the same time. I wanted to see her face. I wanted her punished. The officer running the computer rewound the footage to earlier that evening. Then we watched. I walked up to the front door and opened it. I held my hand out to beckon someone inside, but no one came inside. My neck rotated like I was watching someone walk through the door, but no one did. I was alone. I stopped in the middle of the room and began speaking. The camera showed me holding the door open for empty air, gesturing toward the chair for someone to sit down, nodding as if someone was answering my questions. At one point, I even reached out my hand for a handshake, waiting for someone who was never there to take it. The officers in the room didn't say anything for a long time. They just kept watching the footage as I spoke to a person that did not exist. Gus stood by the window, looking out into the night. Then me and Gus opened the door and left the room. We rewound the tape and watched multiple times. Nobody spoke. The silence was deafening. My name is Frank, and I quit effective immediately. What's happening to my body? I'm going to try to write this in order. I needed to make sense because nothing has made sense for 3 months, and writing is the only thing that still feels like something I can control. My name is Priya. I'm 17. I moved to Harwick in October because my dad got a new position, and we relocated. And I started a new school mid-semester, which was hard, but honestly fine. I'm decent at being new places. I make friends. I smile. I ask people questions about themselves. And actually listen to the answers. It's not a performance. I just genuinely like people. I liked it at Harvard. I like my classes. I like the trail behind the athletic field, where I ran in the morning. I liked a boy named Caden who lent me his jacket when the radiator broke in the 3rd period and never made it weird when I gave it back. I want to remember that I was happy there. Before I explain what happened to my body, it started with my hair. Mid-November, I was washing in the shower and my hand came away with more than usual. A loose clump, maybe 30 or 40 strands, dark against my palm. I told myself it was stress. New school, new city, my sleep schedule was off. Hair loss from stress is normal. I Googled it. I drank more water. I bought a gentler shampoo. 2 weeks later, I was finding it everywhere. On my pillow in the shape of where my head had been. Coiled in the bathroom drain after every shower. I started wearing it up because the sight of it loose unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. It felt less like shedding and more like departing. Like my hair was trying to leave my body before the rest of me got the message. By December, I had a bald patch above my left ear the size of a silver dollar. I wore my hair differently. I didn't tell anyone. The next thing was my gums. I noticed them bleeding when I brushed my teeth, which again, Googled it common, vitamin deficiency, maybe stress again. But it didn't stop. It got worse. By Christmas break, I was spitting pink into the sink every morning, and 2 of my back teeth had developed this sensitivity to cold that made me flinch so hard my eyes watered. My mom took me to a dentist in January. He looked at my mouth for a long time without saying anything, and then he asked me, carefully, the way adults ask things when they're worried about the answer, whether I was eating properly, whether I was under unusual stress. I said yes to stress. He used a word I had to look up later. Recession. My gums were pulling back from my teeth. He said it in the tone of someone describing something they didn't fully understand. He said it was aggressive for someone my age. He said we'd monitor it. I monitored it every morning in the mirror. I watched my own smile slowly become something wrong. January is also when I started noticing Mara. I want to be honest. I had noticed her before, the way you notice furniture, present, peripheral, not particularly significant. She was in my chemistry class. She was quiet. She looked at Caden sometimes in a way I recognized from the inside, wanting something you can't ask for, and I felt for her, the way you feel for anyone carrying something heavy in public. But in January, she started watching me, not subtly, not the quick glances of someone trying not to be caught. She watched me the way you watch a car accident, with this horrible fixed attention, like she couldn't help it, but also didn't want to. In the cafeteria, in the hallway, once in the library when I looked up from my book, and she was at a table 20 feet away, and our eyes met, and she didn't look away. She just kept looking. I mentioned it to Caden. He got a small crease between his eyebrows and said, "That's weird," and I agreed, and we moved on. I should not have moved on. In February, my left, I started watering constantly. Not like crying, like a faucet with a slow drip. The inner corner, a persistent seep of moisture that I was always wiping away. My vision got slightly blurred on that side. I went to an optometrist who found nothing structurally wrong and referred me to a specialist who also found nothing structurally wrong and said sometimes tear ducts just behave strangely and gave me eye drops. The eye drops did not help. What was happening, and I know how this sounds, I know, but just stay with me, was that my left I was becoming translucent. Not quickly, not all at once, in the way that a dyed shirt fades in the wash. over repeated exposure to something that strips color away. I noticed at first in photographs. The iris, which had always been very dark brown, was lighter than my right eye, then lighter still. By late February, it was the color of weak tea. By early March, it was the color of water with just a memory of tea in it. By mid-March, you could see through it to the red at the back. I went back to the optometrist. I went to a different specialist. I went to my GP. I went to a hospital. I have a folder on my phone with 47 medical photos and 6 referral letters and no diagnosis that explains all 3 things together. The hair, the gums, the eye. Because there is no condition that does all 3. Every doctor looked at the previous doctor's notes and found something politely wrong with their conclusions. During this time, Caden held my hand in the hospital waiting room. During this time, I found out about Mara. Her locker is diagonal from mine. I don't know why I never registered this before. Maybe because she was always gone before I arrived in the morning. Maybe because I just never looked. But in March, I got to school early because I couldn't sleep, and I was at my locker when she came down the hallway and stopped at hers, and we were alone in that corridor, and I watched her notice me. The expression on her face lasted less than a second before she replaced it. But I saw it. I have replayed it many times since. It was not guilt exactly, or not only guilt, it was the expression of someone watching a thing they may continue to move. I asked Caden that night whether Mara had ever said anything about me. He was quiet for too long before he said no. I asked if she had ever said anything about it. He said, "She used to look at me a lot. Before you got here, I didn't know what to do about it, so I didn't do anything." I lay in bed that night looking at the ceiling and thinking about the word before I got here, before October, before my hair started leaving my body. I want to be very careful about what I say next because I know what it sounds like. I know how it reads. I am a girl who's been failed by 6 doctors, and I am looking for an explanation that makes everything fit together. And of course, a desperate person finds patterns. Except, I talked to my aunt in Bangalore on a video call in March. She's my mother's older sister, and she has always been a family member who exists slightly outside ordinary reality. The one who keeps neem leaves above the door and says certain things only at certain times of day. I showed her my eye on the camera. I showed her the photos of my hair loss, the dental records. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she asked me, "Is there a girl at your school who wants what you have?" I said yes. She said, "Has she ever touched something of yours? Something you wore?" I thought about my cardigan. The one I left on the cafeteria chair in November. The one I assumed I'd eventually find in the lost and found. I said, "I think so." My aunt closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. She is 63 years old, and she has buried a husband and son, and I have never once seen her look frightened. She looked frightened. She told me what to do. I did all of it. I am not going to describe it here because if any part of it works, I do not want it undone, and if none of it works, I do not want to know that yet. What I will tell you is what happened to Mara. In April, someone found her journal. I don't know how these things move through high schools like weather. By the time I heard about it, the relevant pages had been photographed and were on 4 different group chats. She had written about me in a way that was very detailed and very specific and not metaphorical. She was called to the principal's office. Then her parents were called. There was talk of a disciplinary hearing, of a police report, of restraining orders. I don't know what ultimately happened because by that point my mother had already enrolled me in a different school across town, and I finished a year there, and I have not been back to Harwick. Caden texts me sometimes. I answer when I can. My hair is growing back. Slowly. Thin and fine like a baby's. Like something learning to exist again. My gums have stabilized. My left eye is still the color of water. The specialist says it may continue to fade, or it may stop where it is. There is no medical literature for what is happening to my eye. He uses the word idiopathic, which means we don't know, which means we've never seen this, which means the chart has run out of room, and we are now in the margin. I look in the mirror every morning. I look at the eye that is no longer fully mine. I think about a girl who wanted something she couldn't have and reached into a place she didn't understand taking. And I think about the fact that she is still out there, not in prison, not hospitalized, not dead, just out there, in whatever remains of her life, with whatever remains of herself. I don't know what was in that box her grandmother left. I don't know what she let out when she opened it. I know that sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, the eye that is fading still sees things the other one doesn't. I'm not ready to talk about what it sees, star, asters. Colors are bleeding, and deformed children are stalking. Every time I swipe my thumb across my phone screen, a smear of blue light follows me, slowly fading like a fan of melting water. It hangs between me and the screen until my brain catches up with my eyes. I've gotten used to it, but now it's making me feel sick again. Tapping the correct keys is a pain. Autocorrect and predictive text are saving my ass. I've been searching on Google, scrolling through pages and pages of results without finding anything. I even tried asking ChatGPT, but it spat out the wall of bullshit. Told me that nothing like the creatures I described existed, that it was probably a consequence of fatigue, stress, or some other factor. Of course, even Robot thinks I'm crazy. I'm under the duvet, and I'm sweating so much my shirt feels sticky, and not because of the heat. Last time I checked, my room was still empty. No monsters. I fear they could walk through the walls. But apparently they can. I locked the door and all the windows and told Katie I needed some time alone to prepare for an important exam, because she kept texting and calling me. That door must stay locked. I hope Katie won't decide to come check on me. Damn it. I shouldn't have given her a spare key to my flat. If she opens that door, they'll come in. Fuck. I texted her and told her not to worry, that I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm just studying. I hope she listens. I'm bad. I'm a vet student who lived an amazingly boring life for 21 years before a stupid horse turned it into a nightmare. All my friends, relatives, and my girlfriend Katie know that I'm a rational person. Someone who believes in things you can see and touch. Things you can cut open to see the anatomy. My motto was, if you can't find it anywhere, it isn't real. Until a week ago, I've always dreamed of becoming a vet. Ever since I was a kid, always loved animals. All of them, even the bugs. Mom and Dad never approved of my choice to go vegetarian right after kindergarten. But they couldn't do much about it. So yeah, I love animals. Except horses. Fuck horses. No, I've never done it. I drink beer like once a week, and that's it. 6 months ago, that's what happened. Field rotations were the worst part of being a vegetarian. Tough, but mandatory. We were at this big equine facility outside of town. I can't remember exactly. I just remember the smell of hay and the stench of horse dung. They told me what happened once I came out of a 2-week coma. This stallion must have been spooked by an insect or something and kicked the support really hard. The wood was rotten and heavy. It came down like a guillotine and hit me straight in the back. I didn't even feel it. Everything went black, like someone had yanked the plug. I was very lucky. They airlifted me. Emergency training. They had to cut a piece of my skull because my brain was fried. The first thing I saw when I finally woke up was Katie's face. She was crying and holding my hand. Mom and Dad were there too. But something was deeply spoken, and I heard her voice loud and clear. The pain was bitter. Yellow and green horse around her. Oh my God! As her lips moved, her words turned into a soft light. Then I blinked, and 2 seconds later, the colors faded. So weird, I thought I was still dreaming. The doctor explained it to me later, showing pictures of a brain model. He used a lot of words like sensory cross-wiring and other stuff I couldn't remember. He basically said that the connection between my eyes and the part of my brain that took care of rendering the senses was permanently damaged. The blow had rewired my perception, causing my sight and hearing to merge in a chaotic way. He gave me an easy-to-understand example. Think of it like a GPU that had been overclocked until it melted. The doctor said, tapping a finger on the picture, he pointed at a specific section of the brain. The wiring is now crossed. When the brain receives a signal, it doesn't know where to put the information, so it spills onto the screen, your vision. You'll see visual artifacts, Ben, behind every sound and movement. Your world is going to be vibrant, overwhelmingly so, I'm afraid. Vibrant, huh? Vibrant, he said. He made it sound like I'd just gotten a cool new filter. The real thing was way worse than I'd imagined when they took me home. Reality was completely broken. See, if my cat wiggles her tail quickly, I don't just see it followed by a simple blur. I see it leaving a shimmering comet's tail in the air like a deck of cards, matching the colors of her fur. I see a brown tail where it was half a second ago, an orange one where it was a second ago, and then a black one where it was 2 seconds ago. But all at once, I can no longer ride my bike, or even cross the street alone. The movement and the sound of cars and people turn the world into a chaos of smeared color. Watching a movie makes me vomit. The dialogue and action create a storm of lights, washing out the screen completely, forming surreal pictures. When I walk, I have to take it slow and stare at my feet, because if I turn my head too fast, the whole world becomes a soup of lines and colors. Nauseating. I'm basically living inside a corrupted file. My family has been very supportive. Dad offered to drive me to university every morning. Mom insisted on coming to help clean my flat, and Katie came every day to help me cook. I would stand at the kitchen stove, gripping the counter, try my best to keep the room from spinning. My ears would hear the sound of her knife against the board as she chopped vegetables. But my brain would see her like a smear on the timeline, knife raised in the air. Then boom, dozens of orange and green waves jumped up and down like a slinky toy. My brain worked and struggled to stitch the senses together to form something that made sense. It was so exhausting. Learning how to pour myself a glass of water without making a mess took me a week. After a month, I started to get used to living in a world of melting paint. I was learning how to recognize the auras and how to trust my ears and touch more than my eyes, like blind people do. For a while, I thought that after all, it wasn't that bad, that I could actually learn to live with this. It couldn't get worse, right? Wrong. A week ago, that's when I saw the first one. My condition had started to worsen. I had to keep my head as still as possible while studying, and use noise-canceling earphones to avoid turning the words in the textbook into a spiral of colors. I needed air, so I shoved myself up in the chair, eyes fixed on the floor, and I wouldn't take out the trash. The air was cold, but the sun was pleasant. I gripped the bag and stood still, staring straight ahead at the wall of buildings and empty streets. Then a long trail of crimson ribbons followed a car driving past. They all disappeared when my brain caught up. I took a deep breath, trying to let some tension out, and there it was. Down there, near the communal bin, something was crouching. At first, I thought it was a homeless child, wrapped in sheets, maybe trying to pick up something from under the bin. But the posture was wrong. The proportions were all wrong. His spine was curved at an unnatural angle, and it was completely asymmetrical. I blinked. Maybe it wasn't a child. It must have been a trash bag or a pile of dirty clothes someone had thrown away. It had to, because that thing was too clear. In a world where the tiniest motion or sound left a rainbow trail, This thing was still and perfectly solid. No bleeding colors. But when my vision caught up to reality, it was gone. I looked left, right, everywhere. There was nothing. No smear. No trail of ghostly colors. In my world, everything left a trail. Everything still did. Just next to the bin, some kids ran on the sidewalk, dragging streaks of limbs. But that child, or whatever it was, didn't. It had vanished. Just like that. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. The street was just the usual street. I told myself it had been a stray animal. Sick, probably. Maybe a fox that had wandered into town. My vision had already turned back to the regular rivers of overlapping chaos. Right? It had probably distorted the image of a skinny stray into that weird thing. And about the missing trail, was it a new glitch in my brain? That's what I told myself. Perfectly logical scientific answer. 2 days later, we were walking back from a checkup at the hospital. Katie and I, these long smears of metal and light, stretched down the street and died at the crossroads. As always, I walked head down, holding Katie's hand. She guided me just like those dogs were blind. The doctor told me the swelling is almost completely gone. I'm so happy, she said, gently pulling me. Her words glowed a soft purple. Her shoes squeaked against the sidewalk, creating yellow sparks with each step. I can't wait for her. She didn't finish the sentence. She bumped into my back as I stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. I tightened my grip on her hand. Ow, hey, Ben, what's wrong? She asked. My eyes were fixed there, staring straight ahead of us, at that ruined brick wall bordering an abandoned garden, among pulsing trails of people walking totally unaware of it. That child stood about 20 feet away. He was crouching near the wall, perfectly rendered, so much closer this time that I could see his skin, red, and he wore no clothes. He was completely hairless, and the skin was stretched so tight over the bones it looked like it was about to tear. And the head, his head was... Ben, you're scaring me, said Katie, moving ahead of me. She pulled me and waved her hand in front of my eyes, blinding me for a few seconds. What are you looking at? There, I said. Watch out. That kid. Right there. I pointed at the wall, at that thing. My shoulders heaved as I struggled to breathe. Katie turned her head to look at it, before turning back to me, her eyebrows arched. What kid? There's nothing there. Look. Right there, it's right to... The thing was gone. There was just an old wall, with overgrown bushes and weeds reaching the top. And, just like the other day, no visual trace telling me he'd run away, or jumped over the wall, or anything. Gone. Again. Like never been there. Sorry, thought I saw something. I whispered, unable to speak in my normal tone. My heart was hammering. Sorry, never mind. Just my broken brain playing tricks on me. Yeah. Katie asked me if I wanted her to stay at my place for the night. She insisted on coming up to make me some tea or cook dinner. But I almost had to beg her to go home and rest. I lied and told her I had a massive headache and needed to sleep in absolute silence and darkness. I think she was sad, but she kissed me and left, wishing me good night. Her colorful trail slowly faded down the stairwell. I grabbed one of my university notebooks and ripped out a page. Then I pulled out a black pen and sat at my desk. I didn't know why I felt the need to do it, but I had to get it out of my head, like the illusion of exercising. Drawing with my condition was not easy at all. It would have been easier to do it with my eyes closed, maybe. The pen between my fingers multiplied into dozens of shapeless, ink-stained copies, leaving a black line on paper that took 5 good seconds to turn into a static line. I drew a curve, waited for the colors to fade, let my brain catch up, and then drew the next line. It took a while, but slowly, the shape began to form. First, I traced the unnatural curvature of the spine, followed by the asymmetrical length of the legs, or whatever those things were, so thin and covered in thick lines where the bone met the skin. As I shaded the horrific skeletal torso, my stomach turned. I dropped the pen. It clattered, bouncing against the wall and falling off the desk. My eyes followed as it trailed through the air for almost 10 more seconds. I was about to throw up. The more I stared at the drawing, the more the contents of my stomach rose. Past the monitor, the window seemed to call me, towards that spot behind the communal bin where I'd first seen that thing. The street lights were on. Nothing was there. I didn't sleep that night, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that impossible shape standing on two skeletal legs. The vision was so clear. It moved in a perfectly normal motion, just like the whole world used to, before that horse ruined my life. And the darkness of my room felt like the only curtain hiding things that nobody was supposed to see. The next day, I dragged myself to university. Dad drove me like always. I did it because I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. I was just stressed. Yes, I'd challenge anybody to live with this condition for a single day without going crazy. After morning classes, I went outside to eat lunch. I sat alone on a bench in the campus garden with a tomato sandwich in my hands. Every time I slightly shifted my head or chewed too hard, the vibration made my vision shake, turning the students and the trees into a mess of limbs and leaves. The sun felt so nice on my skin. The sound of birdsong cast a soft glow that helped me relax. Just when I was starting to forget about it, caught up in the moment, there I saw him. No, not him. I saw it again, sitting on the grass, in the shade of the biggest oak tree, just a few steps away from me. I stopped chewing and I almost choked. I immediately put the remaining half of my sandwich back into the wrapper and pushed myself up from the bench. To minimize the dizzying trails, I tried to keep my head as still as I could. One careful step forward, then another and another. A group of students were eating and talking on a blanket just next to the oak tree. A professor walked right past it, but none of them even glanced at it. Nobody yelled in fear or disgust at that thing. They completely ignored it. Or they just couldn't see it? Why? When I looked back into the tree, I expected it to disappear again, but the creature was still there. It had only walked a few steps to the left. Its movements had been too clean and fluid, colorless. I wasn't breathing. Between where it had been a second ago and where it was now, there was nothing. A girl walking past me left a trail of vibrant waves following her. A leaf fell from the tree like a waterfall of green light. Everything did that. Everything bled color. Every fucking thing. Except this thing. For it to move without my brain painting a single trail, it meant, my God, the thought alone froze the sweat all over my face, down to my neck and spine. It meant that thing existed in a way so incomprehensible, it bypassed human perception. But if other people couldn't see it when it was simply standing there, that meant it existed on a different plane of reality? Bullshit. That wasn't possible. Now that I was much closer, I could make out the tiniest details of its body. As a vet student, I'd studied the strangest animals on this planet, so my training kicked in. This was a biological impossibility. The skull was elongated, almost resembling a horse, but the periorbital bone was way too stretched, almost warped. The red skin looked rotten, like that of a decaying corpse. Wet all over its back, sprouting from the bones of its hunched spine, were several bones. They were made of flesh, like tumors. Masses of these fleshy tubes grow like small trees, but made of pulsing veins. On them, patches of exposed muscle tissue leaked a brownish secretion that glistened in the sunlight. Its whole body was skeletal, like it had been starving for months and yet was alive. And then the eyes. Jesus, those eyes. They sat on the sides of that horse-like head. massive and bulging. 2 globes of white, streaked with spider's web of red veins. It had no eyelids, just those wet eyes that resembled 2 dripping fried eggs. I took another step closer. A few seconds later, when my vision cleared again, the creature was no longer facing the grass. Its deformed head snapped sideways. Those horrific eyes were staring directly at me. Its mouth was smiling, and one of its skeletal hands had risen. It was waving at me. I yelled. A rush of adrenaline flooded my body, gripping my heart. I gasped, stumbling backwards. My legs caught the bench, and I dropped to the ground like a dead weight. Scraping my palms and toes, I crawled back while kicking dirt, hyperventilating. I must have looked like an idiot. The students on the blanket were looking at me. The professor had stopped to check what was going on. They all looked at me, and I heard their words. One of the students helped me get on my feet, asked if I was okay. I didn't answer, because all my focus had snapped back to that spot on the tree. It was gone. The creature had vanished, and again, no traces. I thanked the guy and told him I was fine. I didn't go back to class, ignoring the nausea rising from my stomach and my throat. I just grabbed my backpack and walked from the room. I bumped into other people a couple times, apologizing every time. I sat in my living room with all the curtains drawn, every creak of the floor. Every car horn outside made me jump, terrified that if I looked in the corner, I would see that monster again. Then came this moment. The air felt different when I woke up, suffocating. Instead, my body was stiff and tired. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at most. Paranoia. Yes, that was the word. I was being paranoid. Of course, it had all been a hallucination, just a symptom of my damaged brain. I walked into the living room, grabbed the edge of the curtain, yanked it open to let the sun in. I screamed so hard my throat hurt. They were here, through the glass. There were dozens of those children. They swarmed about me, clinging to the walls, railing. All of them were different from each other. Some had these huge trunks of flesh others had calcified growths instead of hair on their heads. I counted 4 of them pressing their deformed faces against the glass. Their skeletal, asymmetrical hands, those 2 long fingers spread against the door, and each one of those melting eyes was staring directly at me, smiling. I slammed the inner door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking so violently I stopped feeling them. When I turned, the room became a spinning vortex. I checked everywhere. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, every corner, every closet. I dropped to my knees and checked under the couch. Then under the bed. Nothing. None of them had managed to get inside. At least, not yet. And now here I am, under my duvet, soaked in cold sweat. My phone is the only light in the room. I don't know what those things are, where they come from. I don't know why no one can see them, or how they can exist. But what terrifies me the most is, I don't know what they want from me, or what they're gonna do if they catch me. But they're out there, hundreds, maybe thousands, everywhere, existing in a way that no one will ever be able to detect. But take this as a warning. If your vision should ever bleed, even for a fraction of a second, and you see just a flash of rotten skin and tumorous growths, or a shape that doesn't belong to the real world, look away. Doesn't matter where, just look away. Because if they know you can look at them, they won't stop looking at you. The hospital ward that references the guy. There is a hospital in my town where I work. It has an abandoned wing that honestly baffles me. It should have been torn down, but for some reason the admins will not touch it, even with an excavator. I was hired to clean and patrol the place at night. Honestly, I wish I was making this up, but I needed the money when I first started my job there, things were normalish and there wasn't much of anything to do except for clean the place and keep the idiots looking for making viral videos away. Nothing much happened, and there were times when be a person or two with permission trying to make videos about this place would come and film there. It's supposed to be haunted, but nothing ever happens. That was until a specific date came around, and I finally understood why this place is treated like a scar on the hospital grounds. That night things were as normal. The place is disconnected from the main power. So I must wood around this electric lantern that is connected to a battery. It works, so don't judge. The ward has 6 rooms with 4 beds in each. There are curtains that separate the beds, but they were removed a long time ago. The beds have no mattress, only a wooden board with a white cloth over them. The light began to flicker in room 2. I thought the battery was not charged or something, so I disconnected it to check. When I did that, I heard these soft whispers and wails. I looked up and around to see where they came from. The beds were empty. I bent down again to check the battery and heard the voices again. Thinking the place was finally getting to me, I ignored them and managed to get the light back on again. When I stood up and around the room, I froze. The beds were all occupied. All 4 beds had childlike figures on them, and they were all covered. I called out to them, but none responded. Thinking it was a prank, I walked to the nearest one and pulled a sheet to reveal the wooden board underneath. This scared me to the point I screamed out and jumped back. The other beds still had figures on them, and I began to shout at them. I watched them shiver in their places, and then a pool of blood forming around them. The blood looked like rivers pouring out of faces. Then the guttural voices of children crying. My hair stood on ends, and I tried to leave the room. Turning to leave, I found myself looking at this black cloud of smoke at the entrance. It floated at the entrance, and something in me felt like it wasn't there to say hi. I could not leave using the windows because they were barred. I called out to the smoke. Cursing myself for that, I walked forward saying a prayer. The smoke thickened, and a freezing cold blanket covered me. I saw my breath turn to mist when exhaling, and began to shout out the Lord's Prayer, only to be replied with a loud scream. That scream was primal, like someone in the final stage of death. I tried to shout louder, and felt someone grab my throat and squeeze. I tried to grab the thing holding my throat, but got nothing. I tried a breath and utter more prayers, but it felt like my windpipe was completely flattened. Panic was not just rising, but rocking up my spine. I took a step back, but my legs gave way and fell down. I lay on my back, and that was when this heavy weight sat on my chest. I tried a breath, but that weight bore down on me, and all this whisper became louder and louder. My vision became darker, like I was about to pass out. Everything rose to a crescendo till nothing. I shot up and found the room silent again. I jumped to my feet and looked at the beds. They were empty. I looked at my lantern, and it was off with the power unplugged. The light from the moon was enough to see the general details. Nothing had moved, except me. I wandered around the room, then switched on the lantern, checked the place. I held my broom like a weapon and walked to every corner to check if I was being pranked, but found nothing. Then I thought about how anyone could prank me with visions. I saw the cloth. I pulled from the first bed on the floor and walked over to pick it up. I bent down and picked it. When I looked at the bed, I saw the body of a girl on the bed. She was maybe 9 years old and definitely dead. Her skin went grayish like she was frozen or something. I froze again with the cloth in hand. I was transfixed on her chest, hoping to see the movement from breathing. Then slowly looked up to check her face again, and saw she was looking at me. The hate in those dead eyes was unmistakable. I began to shake and tried to take a step back, only to bump into something. I turned to see a masked face. He looked like a doctor with his face mask on. What was really fucked up about him were his eyes. They were black holes. It was like his eyes were torn out of his sockets, and they were bearing down on me. What was happening to me, I had no clue. I was in the middle of something, and these things did not want me there. I tried to sidestep, and when I did the head turn, I moved behind the cart with the lantern, and the doctor kept looking at me. I ducked out the door and ran to the main doors. I slipped just a few steps out and fell forward onto the wet floor. Why were the floors wet? Were the thoughts running in my head when my head finally cleared? Looking down at the liquid, I finally realized it was blood. The floor was flooded with blood. I tried to sit up and slipped again, slid around the floor, trying to get up and run out. I began to cry out for help while doing this, and then heard the doors. Someone was trying to get in. I never locked the doors when I was working. Instead of trying to stand, I crawled on all fours to the door. The banging on the doors were not the other guard, but a number of women. They were screaming out names. They were calling to their children. I looked back to the room and saw that doctor figure standing at the door, and his hands were covered in blood. I thought I was in some bad horror movie while crawling on the floor. When I reached the door, I rose to hold the door handle pull. The door opened inward, and just like that, everything reset. I was on my knees, still only that I wasn't covered in blood. I checked my hands. All I saw was dirt from crawling. I got up and looked back to the room, and there was nothing there. I did not want to stay there, so I ran out. I ran to the admin's office and told him what happened. To his credit, the admin listened and believed me. He calmed me down and offered me coffee. I told him everything. He did speak until I finished. Then he spoke. I am sorry you had to go through that. I wish I told you about that place. What I can guess is that the activity is tied to this night. This day some 40 years ago, a doctor, I can't remember his name, went mad from the stress of overwork and killed a total of 12 children under his care. There was an outbreak of an infection that hit the children of the village harder. It weakened them to the point of causing many to fall into a coma. This doctor tried his best in curing them, but could not find a solution. I guess the stress of having the parents screaming at you along with the authorities can drive anyone mad. He slit their throats. In their weakened state, could not stop him. Then it slid on. I wish we could break down that ward, but every time we try, the machinery breaks down or the workers refuse to return. I am not a believer in ghosts and such, but that place forced me to think otherwise. From that point forward, I would not work in that place on the same date. Whatever was reliving that night was pure evil, and I guess I would have been another victim if I had not made it out that night. I wish I knew how I survived. Recently, I explored an abandoned hillside tunnel. I think I'd buried a part of myself there. To be honest, the tunnel itself was unremarkable and wasted. This is expected in urbex. It had a far dead end, and there was nothing to explore other than rubble and debris. Don't really know what I expected to find there, but well, I was surprised, albeit not pleasantly. Nothing about this obsession is pleasant, nothing at all. I might as well quit this soon. The tunnel was a concrete throat swallowed by overgrowth. I was about half a mile inside when the air got noticeably thicker and started to smell of wet stone. My flashlight was having a hard time keeping up, but I had enough battery backup and was rather comfortable to explore a bit further. In what was a den in the walls, I found a rather unassuming, heavy door. It looked industrial and was painted in that ugly gray-green color. I was unsettled at first, as it was a rather odd thing to encounter in a place like this. Regardless, since I was here to explore, I decided to peek in and push it open. It led into a dirty room with a spiral metal staircase at one end. As soon as I entered, I was greeted by the smell of mold on the walls and moss on the wet floor. Water dripped from the ceiling that looked like it was waiting to fall apart right on my head. I wasn't sure what I was doing at this point, or why I was here in the first place. On one of the walls was a depiction, a shadowy man with stark white eyes. It felt like an attempt to scare off cowards, but I wasn't one of them. As I descended down the rusty staircase, my ears started to make out a scratchy, looping jazz record on play somewhere distant, but not too far from where I was. At the bottom was a larger room. which itself had a hallway of rooms that made no sense. The walls were dirty gray, and the floor was wet with murky water. There was a large vent cut into one wall. The music seemed to play from a room further down the hallway, maybe even somewhere down below. Curious as I was, I started briefly exploring some of the rooms in the hallway. Most of them were empty with absolutely nothing in them. What could have this place been? However, some of them were lightly furnished. One room that caught my attention in particular had an old CRT TV buzzing with dead static, and a couch placed conveniently in front of it. The couch had this faded floral pattern to its torn fabric, and its stench was unbearable. Just standing by the threshold of the room made me feel sick. I felt the need to leave, but something about that record on loop somewhere close by beckoned me go further. Another room, almost opposite to the one with the TV in it, had a vintage dining table with 6 scrambled chairs placed in eerily precise positions. One of these chairs rocked by itself and fell to the floor, twitching as if something was moving it around. I couldn't believe my eyes. I'm no believer in the paranormal, but you bet my skeptical brain could not come up with a genuine reason for that to happen. Startled, I left the room to enter the hallway, and then I heard another chair fall to the ground. I didn't dare look back into the room or backtrack on the same path I entered this place in. It wasn't safe. What if a squatter was following me? I was aware there could be squatters observing me, and I had brought some harsh pepper spray for my defense. I couldn't carry a gun or a sharp weapon since it could incriminate me in the wrong place at the wrong time. I decided to cross the hallway, closer to where the record was playing. I was very close. As I turned the corner of a wall to my left, my flashlight hit him first. A man, or a figure with the shape of one, sat perfectly still on a modest dining chair, facing the gray concrete wall. He was staring at nothing. The gramophone was on a short side table in the opposite corner. I froze. I couldn't really make sense of what I was seeing. The man seemed to lack all features a human would have, and he didn't budge an inch. The more I focused on his frame, the record began to slow down, warping to silence as it was struggling to stay on play. My head fell out of my body. The longer I stayed, the closer to the silence immediately followed by a sharp, deafening whistle emerging from one of the large vents. It sounded like one of the death whistles used by the Aztecs. It wailed like 100 tortured souls, singing a song of agony that could never reach our ears. Scream. I didn't want to look at the doorway, but I also did not want to turn my eyes away from the big living chair. But my body moved with it. My eyes met the frame of another still man who stood half obscured by the wall he was trying to hide behind. I directed my flashlight towards him. He was naked, and his skin seemed like it was taxidermy. His eyes were turned upside down in sockets that looked like they were empty. The whistle screeched and blew once again, closer this time. I felt a surge of panic throughout my body. I looked away and scrambled to take the large vented room to escape. That's the best I could do to save myself. I dived in, literally skinning my shoulder. I started to bleed. My left palm dug into an open metal shard too, giving me a tear that made it hard for me to crawl further. I gathered all of my strength. I had to leave this place. I heard something sound like another beat. It was followed by a frantic, rhythmic slap sound, or something crawling into the vent. I spent what felt like hours. I eventually tumbled out into a room that smelled of dead, ancient meat. There was a single white cot. On it, a shape lay veiled under a thin, yellowed sheet. I didn't stop to see if the corpse was fresh. I just ran. This time, on my way out, I found a different exit, a rusted gate that popped under my weight. I didn't stop running until I hit the tree lean closer to the outskirts of the city. I rushed to an emergency ward not too far off to treat my wounds that had bled themselves dry. It was risky, but I could get help sooner than I thought. After a few hours, I was home. The wounds in my skin grew gray, and I smelled of dust and rot. Despite having cleaned myself with several soap solutions, I've noticed that every once in a while, I hear a faint scratch of a needle on a record alternate in my ears. Last night after dinner, I found myself sitting far too long at the dining table and losing track of time, staring at the blank wall opposite to me. I don't quite feel like myself anymore. I feel that I'm waiting for something to arrive, but I'm not sure what it is.
No idea.
So that's all of the story for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and had relaxing time, and I'll catch you guys later. Good night, everyone.